It began with the kind of quiet only winter mornings understand. A frost-bitten hush draped across the backyard, and somewhere beneath the stillness, a soft crunch of paws. You know your dog's rhythm, the eager tap of loyalty, the restless devotion on four legs. But this time, there was something else, something more deliberate, more careful. He wasn't barking, he was carrying. At first it looked like a bundle of fur, tangled, wild, beautiful in that dangerous way. Then it moved, a flash of feral gold, a bobcat, a baby, half-conscious, wounded, cradled not in claws or teeth, but between the jaws of a dog who knew love better than instinct. Everyone said, he's made a mistake, but some mistakes are divine interludes, echoes of a world that once walked in harmony. My dog didn't let go. Not that day, not the next, not even when the world told him he should. They called it unnatural. They said, that's a predator, that's a threat. But my dog saw something different. He saw hurt. He saw a mirror of his own wildness, but flickering, shivering with pain and panic. I watched the days roll in like fog, watched as the bobcat, broken and bleeding, began to breathe with something like trust. She was never chained, she stayed because he stayed. Love, the wordless kind, speaks through protection, through lying beside danger and calling it family. And though the world pressed their palms against the glass of my windows, begging me to intervene, to untangle the impossible, I couldn't, because some bonds are stitched by something older than us. The growl came like thunder in a chapel, shocking not because of its volume, but because of its sacred timing. It echoed through the wooden ribs of the porch, low and deliberate, a vibration more than a sound. The bobcat, still small and trembling, bared her teeth at me as I stepped forward with a bowl of water. My hands, soft and unthreatening, froze mid-air, not from fear, but from realization. She wasn't growling at me as a stranger. She was growling because pain had made her guard everything, even kindness. There was a wildness in her eyes that didn't beg to be tamed. It begged to be understood. People forget that animals remember. Every trauma, every trap, every betrayal dressed as rescue. She had survived in a world where every glance meant danger, where every noise could be the last she heard. And now, here she was, in the warm crook of our backyard, beside a dog who had declared her worthy of trust. Her growl wasn't rejection. It was a scar speaking. I stepped back slowly, deliberately, letting her see that I would not force my presence. And beside her, my dog remained unfazed. He didn't flinch. He didn't growl back. He just lay still, his eyes half closed, like an old monk in meditation. In that moment, I realized something powerful. My dog was teaching her something I couldn't. He was modeling safety, not by commanding it, but by being it. As the days unspooled like threads of golden yarn, her growl softened. It didn't disappear entirely. It evolved. It became a sound of boundaries, not threats. A warning, yes, but also a question. Can I trust you with this closeness? And in response, we didn't rush her. We let her dictate the pace of healing. Every growl became part of a conversation she had never been allowed to have before. A language of survival, reshaped into a language of recovery. The town, however, didn't see poetry in her presence. They saw peril. "That's a wild animal," they said, gripping their fences tighter, whispering over phone lines, warning their children not to wander too close. They couldn't see what we saw, couldn't see the tenderness in her tension, the vulnerability hiding beneath her prickly armor. To them, she was a ticking bomb. To us, she was a blooming wound. But fear is loud. It flails and flattens everything it cannot label. And so, their voices grew. "You're putting your dog at risk," they said. "She'll turn on him. It's just a matter of time." But each time I heard those words, I looked out and saw something more true than their fears. A bond born not of instinct, but of intention. My dog had chosen to stay by her side, not because he was oblivious to danger, but because he saw past it. There's something deeply spiritual about watching creatures defy their nature. It whispers to us of our own potential. If a dog can choose empathy over survival, what does that say about us? If a bobcat can tremble beside a creature that should be her enemy, and still choose to sleep with her back turned to him, what excuse do we have to keep building walls around our own hearts? By the end of the week, the growl came only when strangers approached the gate, not for herself, but for him. She had grown to love her protector, and in that love, she became one. The feral had become family. And though the world still trembled at the idea, we knew some creatures are born wild not to stay wild, but to teach the domesticated how to truly care. In a world obsessed with declarations and dialogues, they existed in silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness, a stillness that communicated more than any bark or meow ever could. They spoke in glances, in shared breaths, in the quiet rhythm of coexistence. My dog would rise and stretch at dawn, and she would mirror him, not out of habit, but as if drawn by a magnetic thread of trust woven through their bones. I watched them every morning as the sun dripped like honey across the frost-bitten grass. He would walk a few steps, stop, and look back. She would follow, cautious yet willing. There was no leash, no collar, no commands. Just a mutual understanding written in the dirt of shared footsteps. Some mornings, she would nuzzle his side. Other days, she kept her distance but remained near. An orbiting moon tethered not by gravity, but by grace. Their language had no consonants, no punctuation. It was carved in the way he would bring her food and wait until she ate, in the way she began to lie closer to him each night, until their fur touched like threads in a tapestry. And it struck me, watching them, how much noise we make trying to prove our affections, how little we say that truly matters. They, on the other hand, said everything in stillness. As their bond deepened, something inside me shifted. I found myself talking less, listening more, not just to them, but to the world, the wind, the trees, the breathing hush of snowfall. My home became quieter, more sacred. It wasn't silence, it was reverence. They had taught me that words often get in the way of real understanding. That presence is the truest form of love. There was a holiness in their routine, the way she began to curl beside him when he slept, her head resting near his paws, the way he never rolled over too far, always aware of her comfort. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't maternal. It was something older than both, something pure. As if in their joining, they were undoing the history of their species, undoing centuries of war between predator and prey. And though the neighbors still clutched their fears like crucifixes, I stopped trying to explain. How could I explain a language I was only just beginning to hear? How could I translate the symphony of silence, the gospel of glances, into something they would believe? No, this wasn't for them. This was for me, for anyone who had ever doubted the capacity of the heart to stretch beyond instinct. One evening, I saw her bat gently at his ear as he slept, like a child testing the softness of sleep. He stirred but didn't wake, and she nestled closer. That tiny moment broke something open in me. It wasn't domestication, it was transformation. She hadn't been tamed, she had been trusted. And in that trust, she had learned safety. She had found her way back to softness. By the end of the month, I no longer wondered when she would leave, because I knew she might not. And if she did, she would carry the language with her, the language of presence, of shared breath and silent prayers, a language no cage could contain, a language I had once thought only humans owned, but now knew belonged, first and foremost, to the wild. The knock on the door came like a verdict, sharp, insistent, echoing off the wood like the tolling of a bell. Behind it stood men with badges and forms, with gloves and cages in the back of a truck. "We received reports," they said, "of a wild animal being harbored here," as if she were contraband, as if her presence were a crime. My stomach clenched, my heart ached. I had known this moment might come, but knowing didn't make it any less cruel. I called my dog inside, but he refused. He stood on the porch, tail low, shoulders squared, like a soldier refusing to retreat. The Bobcat remained beside him, her eyes no longer afraid, but defiant. She sensed it. The shift, the threat. Not of violence, but of separation. That was the new danger now. The kind that didn't bleed, but broke. The kind that didn't roar, but erased. They asked questions, demanded proof. "Do you understand the risk?" they said. "What if she turns?" But she had already turned, toward love, not away from it. She had turned into something gentler, not because of force, but because of freedom. And now they wanted to put her back in a box, to classify her, to confine what they couldn't comprehend. Safety, they said. But it felt like theft. I tried to speak for them, tried to explain what I had witnessed, but language failed me. How could I summarize the sacred in a form? How could I reduce the miraculous into checkboxes and liability clauses? They didn't want my story, they wanted control. And in that moment, I realized, this world doesn't know what to do with love that defies rules. My dog barked, loud and sharp, the first true protest he'd ever uttered. It wasn't just a sound, it was a plea, a promise. I won't let them take her. And she, small, scarred, unshaken, stepped closer to him, brushing against his flank like a whisper of loyalty. Two creatures who should never have met. Two souls who had rewritten their nature in each other's company. One officer moved forward and she growled, not with hatred, but with sorrow. A growl that said, "Please don't take this from me." And I stood between them, heart pounding, unsure of what law I was breaking, but unwilling to break what had healed before my eyes. "Just one more day," I said. "Please, one more day." But we all knew I meant forever, and somehow, miraculously, they paused. One man saw it, the stillness, the sincerity. Maybe he had a dog once. Maybe he had loved something wild. Maybe he had needed saving too. Whatever it was, he nodded. "We'll come back tomorrow," he said. But they never did. Because some stories, once witnessed, change even the most hardened hearts. And that day, our porch became more than a home. It became a sanctuary, a defiance, a place where love, wild and wondrous, was allowed to stay. Healing did not arrive like a ceremony. It did not thunder down from the sky or unfold in grand gestures. It came softly, like dew on wounded earth. Quiet and unnoticed, it crept in through the cracks, through the hush of shared naps beneath trees, through the gentle way the bobcat stopped flinching at falling leaves. My dog's patience became her medicine, and his stillness, her salve. Each day beside him was not just a lesson in survival, but in staying, in trusting that not every kindness had teeth beneath it. I began to see it in her movements, how the stiffness faded from her shoulders, how she lingered longer when I opened the door. Where once she darted at the first creak of a footstep, now she watched with calm eyes. Her body had remembered too long what it meant to flee, but slowly she was learning to remain. She was learning that not all presence meant punishment, that not every reaching hand would trap her. In her eyes, once amber fire, I saw pools now, still, reflective, holding the kind of sadness that slowly becomes peace. And in my dog, I saw the quiet pride of someone who knows they have done something good and expects no applause. He did not boast of his friendship. He did not flaunt her loyalty. He simply gave and gave until she had enough to begin giving back. Sometimes healing does not look like joy. It looks like breath. It looks like the first full inhale after years of hiding. It looks like a predator curling up beside an old mutt with no intention of biting. It looks like sleep without twitching. It looks like trust earned, not with force, but with faith. She began to play, not wildly but gently. Little pounces toward rustling leaves, mock bats toward my dog's swaying tail. At first I thought it was instinct, but then I recognized the rhythm. It was not the play of a hunter, it was the dance of a creature who had found herself again. A language of innocence returning, syllable by syllable, muscle by muscle. The scar beneath her left eye, once a sharp red line, had faded to something softer. A reminder, yes, but no longer a warning. I caught her watching the wind some days, her body perfectly still, as though she were remembering a version of herself that once chased it. But she no longer chased. She simply watched, and sometimes, when my dog wandered into her line of sight, she would follow. Even the townsfolk began to shift. One child saw them through the fence and waved. The bobcat blinked slowly and did not move. Another day, a neighbor left meat scraps on the far corner of our yard. They didn't come closer, but they no longer cursed her presence. Slowly, cautiously, the world was learning to trust what it could not control. Because healing, once seen, has a way of softening even the hardest walls. And I knew then, with the certainty of spring rising beneath the snow, they had healed something not only in each other, but in all of us. They had proven that wounds do not always close with time, they close with company, and that sometimes the strangest embraces carry the holiest balm. It happened in the season of forgetting, late autumn, when the leaves fall too fast to name, and the wind carries away more than just branches. My dog, always so careful, wandered too far that morning. A slip, a yelp, and he was gone over the hill behind the barn, into the thicket where shadows nest. I heard it faintly, the sound of surprise, not pain, but it was enough to make the air tighten in my lungs. I ran, calling his name, my heart beating louder than my voice. She had already gone after him. By the time I reached the hilltop, I saw her, fur bristling, muscles taut, weaving through the trees like smoke. Her movements were no longer wary, they were purposeful. This was no accident, this was a mission. I followed their trail, crushed leaves beneath paw prints, and then I saw him, caught in a wire, trembling, his hind leg twisted where it shouldn't be. But before I could reach them, she got there first. She crouched beside him, circling once, sniffing the trap, and then, astonishingly, she began to tug, not at the wire, but at the brush around it, widening the space, clearing the path for me. She hissed once at the metal, as though warning it not to try again. And when I finally knelt beside my dog, she didn't retreat. She stayed, she watched, she growled, not at me, but at the forest behind us, guarding. Her body formed a barrier, half-moon curved around his side, tail flicking, eyes scanning the woods. I saw it in her then, the protector, not the rescued. The hunter turned healer. My dog whined softly, licking her cheek. She didn't flinch, she simply blinked, slow and sure. It was her way of saying, "I've got you now." It took time to free him. And when I did, he limped, leaning on me. She didn't walk ahead. She walked beside, nose brushing his shoulder every few steps, as if reminding him, "You are not alone in this." And when we reached the house and I laid him down, she curled beside him without hesitation, a living blanket against the ache. That night, something shifted. She had proven herself not just to us, but to herself. She had returned a favor, answered a kindness, and in doing so, completed a circle. There was no more debt between them, only devotion. A bond sealed not in salvation, but in shared vulnerability. My dog healed slowly, as old dogs do, but he never once spent a night without her at his side, and she never again looked toward the fence with longing. Her place was no longer between the trees. It was here, in the heart of a home that once didn't know how to hold her, in the arms of the one creature who saw her not as a wild thing, but as a soul worth saving. And from that day on, no one in town dared say she didn't belong, because in saving him, she had saved the idea that love, real love, asks not what you are, but what you're willing to become for another. They said it was a mistake, from the very beginning, that a dog bringing home a bobcat was a story destined for tragedy. But now, standing at the edge of a year gone by, I look back and see not chaos, but choreography. Not coincidence, but calling. It wasn't a mistake. It was a miracle with claws, with teeth, with a story that wouldn't fit neatly into cages or categories. Miracles don't always wear halos. Sometimes they hiss, sometimes they scratch, sometimes they arrive broken, with blood on their fur and fear in their eyes. But still, they are holy. Still, they come bearing gifts we cannot yet name. And if we are wise, or just quiet enough, we might just learn to receive them. This miracle taught us that love doesn't require taming. It requires presence. That loyalty isn't built on likeness, but on staying. That sometimes the very thing the world tells us to fear is what our soul has been longing for. My dog knew. From the first moment he saw her, he knew. Not with his mind, but with his heart. And so, he refused to let go. Not out of rebellion, but out of recognition. She came to us wild. She stayed with us whole. And in her staying, she healed not only herself, not only my dog, but the space between what we believe is possible and what actually is. She redefined safety, not as control, but as compassion. She taught us that fear is loud, but love is louder and far more patient. Every morning now, they walk together, side by side, a pair that shouldn't exist, a pairing that defies logic. But logic never comforted the lonely. It never cradled the broken. It never stood between a hunter and a trap. Only love does that. And love, when it truly arrives, doesn't care what shape it wears. I sometimes sit on the porch sipping tea, watching them curl beneath the oak tree. She still lifts her head at sharp sounds. He still leans into her when the wind howls. They're not perfect, but they are whole. And that, I've learned, is rarer than perfection. That is what makes the miracle last. To the world, it looked like a mistake, a wild cat, a house dog, a foolish entanglement. But if that was a mistake, then may we all be so lucky to make one like it. May we all stumble into something that undoes us, in the best way. That rewrites our stories in fur and fang and forgiveness. So, goodbye to what we thought we knew. Goodbye to the fences we built in fear. This is a new gospel, a wilder one. One with teeth, yes, but also with tenderness. A story that howls not at the moon, but with it. And in that song, we find not chaos, but the courage to let love in, even when it comes on 4 silent paws.